Previously, I tackled Felix's summer house and transformed it into a lighthouse. It was a nice break from transforming entire bases, but this time we're digging deep and taking on arguably the biggest Minecraft YouTuber around. My name is Oskip, and today I'll be transforming DanTDM's hardcore base. My initial thoughts while starting this build were full of dread, as there was a lot of different builds to this Minecraft base, all being unique and varying in style and design. I thought the best place to start was the centre of the base and work my way outwards. So, once I had done some terraforming and neatened out the landscape a little bit, I began by making a wooden bridge that connected the two sections of land, and on one end, began adding his water elevator that would lead to his small floating castle. Now, as you may have realised, I was building this along with his playthrough, so that as they gradually appeared in his episodes, I added them into the base bit by bit in the same order. This is earlier on in his series, so he initially creates just the one tower. He then moves on to the other side of the bridge where he builds a giant block of flats for his villagers in the style of a giant vending machine. Which, by the way, I thought was a very cool and unique way of theming the building. I make small, separate rooms for each villager role and continue the staircase to the top floor. Once built, I decide to reposition it slightly closer to the water's edge, and then quickly add in his nether portal in the side of the sand dune and his little farm next to the bridge. Dan decides to make a fishing farm, and yet again, he disguises it into a small fishing boat, which was also a clever way of incorporating the farm into a build. Now, coming back to the castle, I start to progress the design by adding the clouds beneath the tower, digging out the ground below, and add on his extra side tower that is also being held up by cloud, completing the floating castle and how it currently looks in his series. Again, on the other side of the water, I did some paths and lighting, his hole of cows, and next to the portal, the sandstone and gold throne for his cat. Beneath the floating castle, I converted the soul sand pit into his turtle pen, and atop the hill to the left of his base, added in a larger field of farms. Lastly, I quickly include his little witch hut in the river. Next, he decides to make this interesting stable for his horses, which underwent a few style changes and ended up changing that roof for stone bricks instead. Now, this was where a few larger changes took place in his series. He ended up digging and flattening out the entire section of land beneath his castle, and adding in a few separate clouds to feature his sheep pen and carrot farm, with a few small clouds in between to allow him to jump from one to another. Onto the final section of recreating Dan's base, I had to remake his iron golem farm. This includes a lava pit covered in water with floating containers on either side which would house villagers, and then a floating section in the middle which would then house the zombie and iron golems would spawn on top. I tell you now, I was not looking forward to transforming this section of the build. I literally had no idea what I intended to do to make this functional yet aesthetically pleasing. Round the back side of that farm, I did some small terrain editing and rebuilt his cactus and bamboo auto farms, which mainly just included a lot of pistons. Lastly, he disguises it as a giant cube-like cactus, and with that, I think we're all done here. base legitimately looks decent, especially for a hardcore survival world. Now it's time to do what I do best. There was a lot of individual builds to tackle here. So I started by lifting some of them up into the air to allow me to terraform and neaten up the landscape a little bit from this completely flat wasteland. After doing some basic bits and bobs, I decided to drain the river, dig it deeper down, and then once done, fill it back up with water. The reason for this was that I wanted to add a bit of colour to the depths, so I scattered around different coloured coral and seagrass. I also included some sea pickles to give some light below, and well, who doesn't love a good sea pickle? On the mainland above, I decided to raise the centre up and clean things up once more. Right, so the first build I decided to take on was his automatic cactus farm that he disguised as a giant cactus. So what I intended to do was create a giant cactus, and then using WorldEdit I can copy and paste his farm into the centre once complete. I made it out of lime terracotta and lined it with strips of green where needed. Lastly, I wanted to make those spikes on the cactus, so using sandstone walls I covered it from head to toe and then adjusted them where needed. Finally, as I clip through to the bottom here, you can see where I hollowed out the cactus and placed the farm in, including a small doorway to enter. Because I decided to relocate the cactus and bamboo farm, I had to make a way to reach it. So crossing the river, I created this upgraded version of the wooden campfire bridge that Dan created, which later on I intend to adjust to match the other bridge. As you can see, I've relocated the vending machine into the sky behind, so that I can use it as reference when creating his upgraded version. I basically wanted to keep the same kind of thing that he had going on, but with some adjustments to make it look more like a real life vending machine. I made slots in the vending machine for each villager role with plenty more to fill up the space. On the right I added buttons, the change slot at the bottom that would act as the entrance, and a small display at the top from blue stained glass. Once I added the large piece of glass covering the front, I lit the entire thing up. I included a ladder at the front to make it practical, and around the side here you can see me including a power cable coming out of the back of the machine and plugging it into the cliff face as a means of power. I don't know how that's meant to work either, but it's Minecraft, so you can do whatever you want. Anyway, it still functions the same way as it did before, it's just a little bit bigger. Now, I decided to clear some area as I wanted to build a barn house for the animals. I opted for a traditional looking red barn outlined with white concrete. I built the barn doors to look like sliding doors, which came out looking decent, and to the left of the barn added in a large red silo to match. I capped it off with a roof and added this little top section in the middle that finished a little bit higher. And as we fly inside, you can see I've started sectioning off areas into separate pens for animals and lining the building with log support beams. I started on the second level with a ladder at the end of the building leading up to that floor. In the middle, I included a rope ladder that hangs down on either side to allow access to the small room atop. I scattered hay bales around the decking of the top floor, and as we come outside of the building, I've included a red sand path, added in some grass, and decided to remove the stable entirely. Next to the barn, I added in Dan's portal. I've made this design before in previous builds, or at least it's very similar. I basically created a circular portal and embedded it into the cliff edge to make it look like it's part of the sand dune. Lastly, I connected up the path to the portal. Moving on to the fishing boat, I relocated it into the centre of the river as I intended to expand on it further. Now, I will admit I did grab inspiration from reference images of other boats I found online, as I'm generally not the best at coming up with good boat designs, and I don't do it too often. However, I was pretty happy with how this was coming along and genuinely had the most fun building this out of everything else in the base. Once done with the main hull of the ship, I added decking and worked on the sail. Now I know this isn't entirely accurate as the boat isn't moving, so it would make sense for the sail to be up, but I was just mimicking the way that Dan had it on his boat, plus I think it looks better with the sail down, even if it makes no sense. I included some diamond blue colour into the sail and made up these custom banners with the same colour and pinned them around the ship. Lastly, I connected the pathway and started adding in some lampposts around to light up the place. And finally, added white banners and carpet over the ropes to look like sheets hanging out to dry or something. As for the witch hut, again I repositioned it to make it more accessible to land, and started playing around with the design. I really didn't want to differ too heavily from the original, as I liked the idea of a small beaten up shack. I loved how the roof design turned out and finished off the house by adding signs to board up the windows. I also used carpet, leaves and vines as moss and plant life to creep up the side of the building. Next to the portal, I started working on transforming the throne. However, I wanted to spice things up a little bit and decided to add a statue of a man sitting in the throne. Using some walls for limbs, I was able to make a pretty decent looking human statue for that size of build. I finished it off by having him hold a torch to light the way, and turned him into an old man with white hair and a beard, before duplicating him to the other side to mirror the portal. It was time to begin designing his new wooden bridge to cross the river. I based the concept on the other bridge I had previously made and, once done, decided to use a combination of slabs and trapdoors to create this canopy or roofing atop the bridge. Now once I'd completed it on this bridge, I knew that I had to include it on the previous bridge. So I flew over to the other side of the river and did just that. This was a little trickier as it ended differently on each end of the bridge, but with a little bit of tweaking I was able to pull it off. Now, onto probably the main reason that most of you clicked on this video. It's time to transform his castle. I knew I was going to have a lot of fun with this one, as castles are kind of my thing, but once I cleared the area and created a platform to build off of, I was straight into transforming the main tower. Oh, and I decided to raise this a lot higher into the sky so that it fits in with the clouds. Now, I wanted to keep to a sort of theme for this castle. As the castle is literally mid-air sitting in clouds, I went for a more fantasy, Disney-esque build. I also wanted to keep things relatively simple in the layout and design, as I intended it for it to be a small and personal castle. If I made it too big, it would just look completely out of place in the sky. Actually, now that I think about it, a castle will probably always look out of place because it's floating in the sky. Whatever, you get what I mean. The back towers are basically the same as the front, I just raised them higher and added in a little outcropping that raised the top further. I placed the roof on top and adjusted it, including little windows on either side, and once done, mirrored it to the other side of the castle. I filled in the remaining gaps with 2 walls connecting the towers together. I decided to add a roof to the middle section with a miniature tower atop of it. Under this was the main living area of the castle, so I didn't really want it to be exposed. Finally, I added these spikes that lined each of the roofs and cut away at the platform it was sitting on. Adding to the underside of the castle, I needed something solid for the castle to sit on before adding clouds. So I brought the rock platform down to create these giant stalactites. 4 for each tower and a large one in the centre. Once happy with how they looked, it was time to start adding the cloud. I opted to change the pre-existing white wool that Dan used for his cloud for white and light grey stained glass, as it gives us some transparency and adds to the illusion of it being a cloud in the first place. Lastly, I spent some time repositioning the castle around to fit better with the base below, and thinned out the cloud a little bit. And that's it for the castle floating in the clouds. Okay, so earlier I made this hill in the terrain and I already knew what I had planned for it. I wanted to make a shrine atop it. Now, obviously, I wanted to make this completely accessible and contemplated how to get to the floating castle in the first place. So, instead of a water elevator, I decided to use a command block beneath a pressure plate in the centre of the shrine, so that, once stood on, teleports you to the castle entrance. Now, no, this isn't possible in survival, and some could argue that it's a little bit cheaty, but I didn't really want a huge water elevator reaching into the sky connecting to the castle, as it would just look bad. Plus, I really like the idea that the only way to access the floating castle is by making it to the shrine, where you'll be teleported into the clouds. As I said earlier, this was part of the build I was most scared for, as I really had no idea how I was going to transform this iron golem farm. In the end, I decided to turn it into a coliseum of sorts. I moved the area for the zombie into the middle of the arena and added the little villager booths on either side held up by supports. And finally, added a layer of seating for any audience members that wish to watch the Iron Golem spawn and burn to death. While down here, I decided to scatter around some simple foliage just to fill out the dead space. And for the final stage of the transformation, we're back in the castle where I place down a beacon that comes through the floorboards and pierces out the top of the centre tower into the sky, going through some blue stained glass in the roof to change the colour of the beam. Now, I've spent way too long on this transformation as is, but I had to do some sort of interior to make it more livable. After cleaning up the walls a little bit, I add in this grand staircase that leads to the second level under the middle roof. I also make a secret little room behind the stairs if ever needed. As for the towers, excuse the crazy camera work here, I decided to make a simple spiral staircase that leads to each of the different floors and the walkways atop the walls of the castle. I end up doing this on each of the towers, which isn't ideal, but it can easily be adjusted to make more rooms. Lastly, we come to the second level of the main area. Again, I added a small spiral staircase that led up to the small tower in the middle, added some supports and lighting, and with that, we're done here.
Ladies and gentlemen, can I please have your attention? I've just been handed an urgent and horrifying news story, and I need all of you to stop what you're doing and listen.
Made with bits of real panther, so you know it's good.
It's quite pungent.
Oh yeah.
It stings the nostrils. In a good way.
Yeah.
Brian, I'm gonna be honest with you, that smells like pure gasoline.
60% of the time, it works. Every time.
That doesn't make sense.
As always, I hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, then please like the video and comment down below to let me know how you think I did. If you're new here and you want to see more of these transformations, then hit that beautiful red subscribe button and turn on notifications with that little bell next to it so that you'll be alerted as to when I next upload. Also, if Dan does get to see this, then I think it'll be really interesting to see it from his perspective and having a look around the place. So let me know. If any of you watching and want to check this build out for yourselves, then you can do so by downloading it on my Patreon, which I'll leave a link to it down in the description and I'll add it onto the end screen of this video as well. Anyway, I hope that you guys enjoyed and I'll see you next time.